Today we're going to live dangerously. We're going rogue. It's no secret that I absolutely love the visual stylings of Necromunda. I'm an absolute cyberpunk freak, and because Necromunda is absolutely GW's closest thing to a cyberpunk setting, it has always resonated with me really closely. Now, a weird quirk about being a commission painter is that quite often you'll be asked to replicate Games Workshop box art, and that was what happened on this commission for the Necromunda Rogue Dog from Forgeworld. Now, as you can see, comparing the box art to my version, there's still some stylistic differences in what I did, and that's kind of a fun exercise when you're a commission painter, being able to unpack a paint job and look at what little tweaks you'd want to make to it, so that you're still essentially producing the same thing, but you're doing it with your own stylistic approach. It's something I have a lot of fun doing, so I want to take this Rogue Dock as an example to show you some of the little thought processes behind the tweaks that I made and how they ended up giving us something that looked still quite different to the original art, despite being in very much the same colour scheme. Okay, the first thing I want to look at is that rubber hazmat suit, or whatever it's supposed to be. For some reason, she's also wearing a rubber glove underneath it in the same material in the box art, which is very odd because the suit clearly has hands moulded into it as part of it. But okay, so looking at that, the first thing I'm seeing is a really beautiful, bright, tealy sort of pale colour, which I love. I am a massive fan of teal. But I do see it looks a bit flat to my eye. Now, funnily enough, the version that I saw online of this photo is very different to the version that's printed on the actual packet that you buy. On the packet that you buy, the picture that's been printed out has had the contrast pushed way up, and I think it's probably because this green rubber suit looks so flat. So that's something I'm going to want to change. I'm going to want to try and create some more contrast in that rubber. Also, if you look really closely around where the hand is holding the gun, there's a few little sort of glinty bits that don't look like edge highlights. They look like actual natural reflections, which suggests to me that maybe this rubber suit has been gloss varnished, but just that the photo doesn't show it off very well. So what am I going to do differently? Well, first of all, for that rubber suit, I'm actually going to start off all the way down at Sotek Green, a much, much darker colour than the base colour that GW have worked from. This is going to enable me to really push that contrast a lot. I'm going to shade it with Agrax Earthshade because I want to create some sort of conflicting shadows in there, some shadows that aren't the same colour as the actual base colour itself. Again, this is really good for pushing lots of contrast. So the Agrax is going to go in and give me brown to clash against my turquoise, and that's going to look really cool. Now we'll just take that Sotek Green and start mixing successive amounts of Vallejo Sunny skin tone into it. Any sort of pale yellow would work. GW's Dawn Yellow would also be a good example here. But the yellow is going to kind of start to push it more in that greeny direction. Sotek Green, despite its name, is very blue. So we're going to start ending up towards that tealy turquoisey nice bright tone. But at the same time, we're going to be getting a lot brighter each time we add a stage for highlighting. I'm also going to make the decision to forego that gloss varnish. Not that I think it looks bad necessarily, but that I think gloss varnish sometimes has a way of kind of diminishing contrast a little bit because it creates all of these artificial highlights that make it hard to see what's actually been painted underneath. I think it's great for small detail areas, and later on in this workup we will use some gloss varnish. Okay, next I'm going to look at the skin. And now I really like the way the skin's been tackled in the box art actually. I think it's really beautiful. It is a little bit lower in contrast than what I personally like to go for. And I do think maybe those pinky tones are a bit typical. We could maybe make things a bit more interesting to look at by going for more of a sort of slightly bronzed or slightly tanned kind of skin, just to create something that's a little bit different. So I'm going to start out with Nocturna Base Flesh, or Basic Flesh, I'm not sure exactly how that translates on the bottle, and I'm going to just get that all over these skin areas to begin with, get a nice solid coverage. From there, a layer of P3's Flesh Wash. Now this will introduce a few subtle pinky tones. It also, when it concentrates in the deepest recesses, starts to produce some kind of almost purpley tones. So it's a really cool little wash. It has a bit of an opaque base to it, so it doesn't quite behave exactly like other washes, but I should warn you, it does dry quite glossy, so you are going to want to just put a stab of matte varnish over it afterwards, just to get rid of some of that sheen. And again, we're going to go to our old friend Ice Yellow for the highlights, just mixing Ice Yellow into that basic flesh and applying some slow, successive, careful layers, feathering out any edge transitions to get a nice smooth coating of flesh with some good, even highlights. For the last couple of highlights on the flesh, the Ice Yellow does have a way of just kind of oversaturating flesh tones a bit, and quite often that is what you want. You want those really bright, bolshy flesh tones. But for this one, I wanted to just desaturate the final highlights, so just added a spot of white at the very end, just to calm down those last couple of highlights on the skin. Okay, so there's a lot of small bits and bobs on this miniature as well, and this gives us an opportunity to make a few little subtle changes that maybe will make the miniature stand out overall from the original box art. So there's some of it that's really obvious, you know, things like bandage wraps are going to be kind of creamy colours shaded with browns, and anything that's a leather strap is going to be, you know, a sort of Mournfang brown or a Rhinox hide, and then adding some oranges into that to produce highlights. We won't go over that sort of stuff because, you know, we do those things a lot on the channel anyway. There are, however, some bits that are worth talking about, some of the smaller bits where we can make some cool differences. For example, anything that's black on the miniature, I'm going to highlight by mixing successive amounts of Ice Yellow into black. Now this creates a really interesting grey series of gradients that's ever so slightly warm toned, and it helps make blacks, even when they're highlighted, stand out nicely from cold colours like that teal. You'll often see that when I'm highlighting black, I'll actually use teal or turquoise as my highlight colour. Obviously that wouldn't have been a good option here, and I felt like a neutral grey might just get lost a little bit. So this slight warmth to the grey really just helps us with keeping the black standing out nicely without it looking like there's too much going on. Some of those blacks will need a little calming down though, so a shade with P3 Armor Wash is a really good shout here. Again, this is a wash that has a slightly opaque base to it. It's not like a typical Games Workshop wash where it's very, very transparent at its base. And so what that means is that as it settles into recesses, it creates a little bit more definite shadow in some of those areas, and it produces, again, a really lovely effect. These P3 washes have really impressed me since I started trying them. And for the metallics, I wanted to start off from a bit of a darker silver than what they'd done in the box art. Again, I felt like that was an opportunity to make a bit of a difference. So I'm going to go with Boiler Black from P3, and this is essentially kind of a remake of the OG Games Workshop bolt gun metal, that really, really dark metallic. They still do some metallics that are similar to this, so you absolutely could use whatever your nearest Games Workshop metallic is, but this Boiler Black, it just goes on so smoothly. I feel like it's really, really nice to work with, and again, since I've been trying these P3s, they've been a pleasure, so I'm going to lean into it and use some more P3 here. However, I am going to lean on an old favourite for highlighting those metallics. I'm going to mix some Vallejo Metal Colour Chrome into that Boiler Black to build up my successive highlights here. It's a classic method now on this channel. We use it quite a lot, starting with whatever dark metallic colour and just adding more and more chrome to it to get our highlights. But it's a favourite for a reason. It just works so well. And then weirdly, breaking up the tradition a little bit, after the highlights are applied, I'm again going to apply some of that P3 Armor Wash just to soothe this back down and create some shadows. Now, we don't normally wash things after we've highlighted them, but in the case of washes that leave a bit of a glossy finish like this, on areas where I'm not going to be applying matte varnish and I actually want some sheen and want some gloss, putting them on last actually helps accent the highlights even more. So it's a really, really good idea to consider what order your washes go on. And there were a few other little things I did. As I said, I wanted to introduce a bit of gloss varnish to this on some smaller areas. So on those little sort of fluid cups, one's screwed into the gun and the other she's holding in her hand, I did hit those with a bit of gloss varnish to make them look kind of cool and shiny, but I also painted some manual reflections into them so that if the light isn't hitting it right for the gloss varnish to be doing its thing, there is still some representation of light there. I do think it's important to take that approach when you're going to use gloss varnish. Don't just lean on it to do the job for you, because you're going to rely on it being held at the right angle to the natural light in the room there for it to be able to do its job properly. Anyway, With all of that said, with all of those little changes and everything else just kind of handled in the obvious way, let's take a look at the completed miniature now. So you can see that what we ended up with was pretty damn cool. She still very much has that visual styling of the box art. She still fits into the Necromunda kind of visual cues, and she works well in that setting. But I've just been able to kind of use my own approach, my own thoughts, my own feelings, and my own ideas regarding certain things and the way they should be painted to separate the look slightly so that the overall finished product still feels like something I painted and not just a copy of something that somebody else painted. And it's really important to be able to get into this mindset, not just as a commission painter actually, but as any kind of hobbyist painter who doesn't want to constantly feel like they're just doing copies of box art. I know that this can be a frustration for some painters, so I really hope that just getting into my thought process here helps give you a few ideas for ways that you can switch things up and get the same sort of overall look, but have the specifics be a little bit more to your style and your taste. Anyway folks, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got cool methods for what you do when you're approaching box art but want to put your own spin on it, get at me in the comments and let me know the kind of stuff that you're up to, because I'd really love to talk to you about it. If you enjoyed the video, hit that thumbs up button. You can also subscribe to the channel and enable notifications to stay up to date on what I'm doing here on YouTube. If you really love the content and you want to support me making it, you can do so via my Patreon, which is linked in the description, along with all of my social medias. Tiers on Patreon start from as little as $1 American a month. It's time for me to get out of here now folks, so thank you so much for watching this video. We're going to roll the end credits now, but I'll see you in the next one.